Yeah, McCloud's a kind of a unique situation in some ways. Basically was an idea of a couple of guys in the late 1800s of how to get to the timber in the McCloud Flat. Here, it was some of the finest timber in the world. So they built a few buildings, had a few houses for a few workers, and decided to build a railroad from Sisson over to the McCloud area. Mill the lumber here and then haul it back with the railroad. And that was kind of the beginning of the McCloud concept.
Originally, the town was supported by the mill. So when the mill closed down in the late 1990s, our town struggled. Now our visitors come to McCloud because we're at the base of Mount Shasta. We also have the oldest golf course of Northern California. And we also are known in the McCloud Falls for fly fishing and the McCloud rainbow trout that's been planted all around the world.
Yeah, McCloud has a lot of assets. We have 17 structures that are registered with the Park Service. I mean, the history here is rich. And, you know, we live in California. We have earthquakes and we live next to a volcano, but they're not the big threat to McCloud. McCloud's big threat is wildfire.
This project is quite unique because our property really occurs in a horseshoe shape around the community of McCloud. Some of our fire lines go right up to the backs of private residences and critical pieces of infrastructure. We believe that managing these kind of critical barriers between town and those very large contiguous ownerships can make a difference, and I certainly hope that other private landowners will take PFT's lead here and start to deploy fire as a tool, not just for community protection and habitat restoration, but really as a tool for forest management.
We're just going to talk a little bit today about prescribed fire, the processes that we take to do the implementation of the prescribed fire, and there's a lot of considerations we take in. Fuels, weather, topography, on-the-ground safety for the men that are there. And why are we doing all of this? We're doing this to protect communities, to protect the wildlife, and to save our environment from these catastrophic fires. Over the last 2 weeks, we'll have burned almost 500 acres near the town of McCloud. We're reducing the fire hazard, fuel loading, and ideally we're giving a place where if there is a wildland fire, this is a great place for the agencies to stand back and hold the fire from.
Here we are in this incredible, beautiful spring, and it's hard to believe that in 5 days it's going to be 85 degrees in the middle of May. California is so much hotter and so much drier than any of us believed it could be. And what's happening is it's stressing out our forests, and it's leading to incredibly different fires than we used to have. More extreme, burning hotter, covering bigger areas. So this is hard not only on forests, it's hard on forest communities like McCloud and so many others that are right next to the forest. And fires that start in the forest are burning into communities and burning in ways that are very unpredictable. So how did this happen? How did we get here? It's climate change, and it's also that the forests are different than they were 100 years ago when European settlers first came here. There's more trees per acre, and the fires have been suppressed. And when we put out every little fire, what we end up with is great big fires. So what the indigenous people did here before fire suppression was they burned, often every year, but very frequently, and they created a very fire-resilient forest that is the kind of forest we need to restore again in order to deal with climate change.
CAL FIRE is partnering with tribes all across the state to understand traditional ecological knowledge and incorporate into our prescribed fire practices statewide.
For us as Indigenous people, fire is its own being. In just the same way that we would live with bear, we live with fire. Our communities have been devastated by wildfires from the effects of fire suppression for 130 years, or more at this point. As far as I see it, we have two options. We can continue going the way we have been, losing homes and families, wildlife, and pristine areas. Or we can rise up together and create a fire-safe neighborhood by adding fire back to the ground in a good way, which promotes forest health, promotes our community health, and it promotes togetherness. Whether you're color, race, religion, we can do it together. Being a spiritual being, as fire is, we've learned to work with it, to relate to it, how to use it to our advantage. Because fire can be almost like an unruly toddler. If left unattended, it's gonna act out and do as it will, and it can be a very, very destructive force. But when nurtured, when understood, when cared for, it is an ally to us.
One of the first things we all need to understand is that fire will always happen in the fire-prone landscape. Fire is unavoidable and inevitable.
Coming out of the last decade of the most damaging and deadly and destructive fires in California history, we've got to reclaim prescribed fire to get our forests to a more resilient state, to get to a place where we can actively manage fuel breaks and industrial timberlands to a condition that ultimately will mean that the fires, when they do hit, and they will hit, this is California, but they'll hit with less intensity.
The paradox of forests is that they're very flammable, but they need fire. So the issue is, how do we have good fire versus bad fire? And the Native Americans knew how to do that, and we, the rest of Californians, are learning how to, and we're having a merging of the traditional ecological knowledge being really respected and valued now, along with Western science showing the way to recreate a fire-resilient forest is to reduce the number of trees per acre, thin it out, get the little trees out of the understory, and then follow it up with fire. If all you do is only thin, you still lose a lot of the forest when a wildfire comes through. But if you thin and also run low-intensity fire along the ground, then you have a forest that's going to better withstand a big fire when it comes through.
Since its inception, our prescribed fire burn boss program has certified 37 burn bosses across California.
The burn boss will plan, organize, implement, and document the prescribed fire from start to finish, mopping up until there is no heat, no smoke detected for 3 consecutive days before calling the fire out.
We want to reintroduce fire in a controlled and safe way. So the pre-burn mechanical and chainsaw prep work that goes into these units is critical. Where we're standing here, we've taken out some of our smallest trees using chainsaws, but we really need to treat this shrub layer before we can safely burn without accidentally killing our overstory trees. With tall shrubs like this, the fuel ladders are well connected to the crowns of the trees, and we can inadvertently send fire way up into the canopy. So it's important to come through with this careful step of mechanical site preparation before we can restore fire to the landscape safely. We were able to burn this stand just a couple of weeks ago, kill some of the smaller understory trees like white fir and even ponderosa pine, while retaining the health and vigor of our largest overstory trees, using fire to improve the overall health of this stand.
So this is a commercial timberland property. And the thing about commercial timberland is it's a big, big investment, and it takes a very long time to mature. And so for decades and decades, that natural asset is growing, but it's at risk, particularly as we have these hotter, bigger fires coming through.
Prescribed fire is a fraction of the cost of responding to an unmitigated wildland fire. In terms of timber, an unmitigated wildland fire can destroy generations of investment in that land. Prescribed fire can preserve generations of that investment.
Standing timber is essentially uninsurable. So a landowner who has substantial standing timber on their property faces significant risk, primarily from a catastrophic wildfire coming onto the property or starting on the property. Prescribed fire, when used appropriately with proper planning, can help reduce the risk of that catastrophic fire wiping out the standing timber. So though a prescribed fire won't compensate for a loss, it may help avoid that loss from occurring. As an owner and manager of a large timberland tract, we welcome any actions taken by an adjacent landowner to reduce fuels and lessen the risk of catastrophic wildfire. In this particular case, we really appreciate the communication that we got from Terra Fuego, PFT, regarding this project. We really appreciate the preparation work that went into it prior to the burn, getting the site prepped, making sure adequate containment lines were in place. We appreciate the expertise that they exercised and used when conducting the burn. That all limited our risk and our perceived risk, and it was followed up by frequent communication during the burn. So we were in the loop, we knew what was happening, we had an opportunity to come out and visit the site during the burn to ensure that our adjacent lands were not going to be negatively impacted.
For today, we're going to start a test fire up here by drop point 10, and we're going to bring firing down this unit here towards the south.
So what we're doing here is we're adjusting our firing pattern to work with the topography and the fuels to shape how the fire moves and to control the intensity. So we want to have a nice hot fire that stays on the ground. We don't want to hurt these big trees. And we have things out here like there's an old dead tree laying down here that had a lot of needles on it. So we know that when we light that, it'll draw the fire towards it. When we create a whole bunch of heat, it creates an updraft, and that pulls the winds. So you can see that this area we lit right here, it sucks straight towards the big pile of fuel. So if we're strategic about the timing of how we light things, we can steer the fire by adding fire in certain places.
So what we have here is that we have some lighters that are going along the perimeter containment line, and they'll strip fire that out. And then that'll start to build a little bit of heat, and as it's doing that, I'll have dot firing coming along that will be allowing that original line of fire to pull heat into that, so that we're pulling upslope. And then these dots that we're putting out here near the base of the conifer stands, is that will allow us, when we're dotting next to it, it allows the fire to get established at the base of it. Instead of, if you're out in the open areas, if you put fire then it creates a bunch of heat and it goes and slams those trees with a bunch of heat. So if we put the dot at the base, it'll grow out from there as the intensity builds.
So today, it was about 1400, 2 o'clock. Our burn was getting much warmer than we wanted it to be. It was consuming more. It was doing more scorch to the trees. We checked it out, we looked at it, we decided we'd shut the burn down. We put it in check where it was at. And we're waiting till this evening to where the temperature lowers, humidity goes up, and then we're going to re-engage and continue our burn on the one particular unit we're working on right now.
So getting to see the process of the prescribed fires here, you know, a lot of people have fear, especially when they smell the smoke or see the smoke and how it's going to impact the town. A couple years ago, we had several fires right around us. We were socked in with smoke for months at a time. So the air quality was bad, right? The fear of that fire creeping in and threatening the community, it was terrible. Everybody was worried about that. High alert, had go bags ready. So when they do this prescribed fire and use the science and the resources that they have, the timing was right. When they were doing the prescribed fire around the town, the smoke lasted maybe a couple days. The impact from the smoke in the community was minimal. They timed it right. The breeze was blowing just right. Most of that smoke was blowing away from the community. So I was not worried at all. I knew that they had things under control. They had a lot of resources there to manage it properly. And from what I can see, they did an amazing, great job.
The accepting by the public for the smoke is a big issue. And it's all about education to help them understand that this is prescribed fires are done under certain weather conditions, and so the smoke is limited and minimal compared to what a wildfire would be.
This forest property has been managed as a working forest for generations, but it's also a matrix of critical wildlife habitats. We know that white firs and other conifer species can grow up in these habitats and actually lower the water table, decrease the availability of groundwater and surface water for wildlife and plant species alike. So we're using fire to expand and enhance the extents of these diverse habitat types. This aspen stand that we are in, it holds water for longer into the summer and fall dry seasons, and it will essentially serve as a fuel break. It will not burn as hot or as quickly or as dangerously as surrounding conifer stands. So by expanding these diverse and unique habitats, we're also altering fire behavior across the property.
During the month of April 2024, Terra Fuego prescribed fire on 575 acres of the 1,300 in 6 days with 25 firefighters and 2 Type 6 fire engines. We can do this to scale. We can provide fire around these communities in preparation for a landscape that's dominated by frequent prescribed fire. Frequent prescribed fire is a critical ecological stewardship process and can be a cost-effective management tool, providing the greatest resiliency from catastrophic fires.